Well, let's start with James Boasberg, Judge James Boasberg, or I don't know, maybe at the White House you're sarcastically calling him President Boasberg, because clearly he's done something there that has struck a nerve at the White House. But more than that, I'm wondering about the contours of what this fight is really about, because James Boasberg seems to represent a growing movement of judicial activism in the court system. Talk a little bit about that, May, if you could.
Yeah, so this is a judge who does think that he is the president of the United States, that if we were to go to war and he didn't like where the troops were being sent, that he could send them to another place if it didn't serve, DEI or whatever. So this movement by judges to really usurp core executive power, which is keeping our nation safe, deporting not just criminal, but these are the worst of the worst. This is, using the Alien Enemies Act. So, people who are sent by a foreign country who are committing crimes against our country. And the president has the authority, but more than the authority, the responsibility to keep people safe. And for judges who feel like they want to use not even a final judgment, it's not like there's been a trial, but use temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions in order to gut the president's core responsibility, this is a very dangerous move by the judiciary, because this is unchecked power. The people do not control judges. They do not elect judges. They are asserting unchecked authority.
And along comes John Roberts, the Chief Justice, to interject in the middle of this, which was a brazen move for sure. I'm curious to get the reaction of that, because quite frankly, if this Alien Enemies Act case comes before the Supreme Court, you wonder if he needs to recuse himself at this point. He clearly has a vested interest and has said something before anything has transpired at the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, it was highly unnecessary. And I do understand the need to preserve the independence of the judiciary. But when you jump into political fights, when you make this seem partisan, when you make it seem like you're trying to pick sides in a partisan battle, that's not the nonpartisan approach that Chief Justice Roberts promised when he was going through a Senate confirmation process. He said that it is his job as a justice to be an umpire. I just call balls and strikes as they come to me. And here he is jumping and trying to get in the game. And not only that, whether you think impeachment is or isn't the right solution, I think the acknowledgement, the thing that the American people actually need, is what is the judicial power? Because when these judges are reaching outside the judicial power to assert political power, to assert executive power, outside of what their job is, that's the concern. That is what he should be addressing. Because if he doesn't, then judges are going to create a crisis in our country.
Right. When, of course, we're hearing about these words, constitutional crisis, they're coming from Democrats specifically saying, hey, we are in a constitutional crisis because the president is testing the bounds of executive privilege. What does the White House say in response to that?
The only crisis that there is that judges are trying to pretend that there is not a popularly elected president. And so here's how the Constitution works, is the people have the power. You and I, the people, the voters have the power. And the way that we're able to constrain the executive is we vote for the executive. And we can constrain the legislature because we vote for the legislature. But we have no control over judges. And so the way that judges keep our democracy is they constrain themselves. They constrain themselves. They are committed to the text of the law. They're committed to the history of the judiciary, that sort of thing. And when judges do not constrain themselves, that's the source of the crisis.
Well, talking about constraining judges, you've got 2/3 of these federal injunctions since 1963 have come against President Trump. In other words, most of these have come against the president. Look, you clerked for a federal judge in your career. I mean, you know the deal here. You got Senator Josh Hawley, who's come out and said, look, we got to do something here. The abuse that's going on. What's the sense there at the White House about legislation, whether it be legislation that Senator Hawley has? He hasn't introduced it yet, but this idea that federal injunctions are indeed seem to be very lopsided.
Yeah, Congress is years too late on this.
Hmm.
Congress is so busy trying to get earmarks for their pet projects and not enough time doing what our founders thought that they would do, which is preserve their branch. They thought that this system of checks and balances would be, the president cares about executive power and the legislature cares about legislative power and the judiciary, but instead everybody just cares about their own reelection. And so if Congress got back to caring about its job, its power, its legislative power, its number one priority right now would be addressing these nationwide injunctions, because these nationwide injunctions are overturning their laws, their policies. The Alien Enemies Act is a law. And if they would like that law to have any power whatsoever, then they need to stop these nationwide injunctions, because it means one single person can undo all of the work of the legislative branch. This should be Congress's top number one unquestionable priority.
And May, to go along with that, you also have Congress that has, through Article 3, through the powers in Article 3, to be able to not just establish, but regulate courts. You wonder at some point if that needs to be addressed, because this seems to be a crisis that could just only really get worse at this point.
Yeah. And, our federal court system is still good. And it's something that we need. We rely on our courts. We rely on the rule of law. And American people want to be able to trust our courts. We want them to be fast. We want them to seek justice. There are people who are wronged in this country every single day, and they need a place to go, and they need courts to turn to. And so Congress's power, yes, needs to limit the use of these nationwide injunctions. But also they need to be thinking about if courts lose the American people, if people no longer treat them as fair places to seek justice, that is the end of our American system. And so Congress really does have a big decision here. And yes, the Constitution establishes a Supreme Court, but it's up to Congress to regulate the entire rest of it. And so it should be a top priority.
In terms of impeachment, we've heard that word bandied about, even the president going there. What's the sense on that? Is this more about holding judges accountable, whether it be impeachment or something along those lines? Because it's going to be probably pretty hard to impeach the judge or any judge in the House. You've already got moderate Republicans saying, I'm not quite sure we're going to go along with that. And even if he is impeached, to convict him in the Senate, I mean, to get 2/3 is going to be very difficult. So what's kind of some would say, what's the point of impeachment, or at least going down that road?
Yeah, I mean, impeachment is the tool that's there, right? And so that's the tool that's talked about. But it is insufficient in the sense that it takes a long time. It requires a lot of coordination. It's one by one. And so impeachment, while I think it absolutely should be discussed, it's never going to address the full problem. And the full problem is that there are a suite of judges. And yes, you've got Boasberg saying who you can and can't remove as an alien enemy. But more than that, we have judges telling us what emails we can and can't send, what personnel we can have, our military recruitment. I mean, can you imagine judges running who can be in the military? What GPA did you have to have in high school? What BMI can you have? What's your time for the mile? And here they say you have to have individuals with gender dysphoria in the military. By what authority are you telling us how we can run our military? And so, yes, impeachment, certainly worth discussing, also not enough.
Yeah, for sure. Let me ask you, let's move to the Department of Education. Just a quick couple questions on that. Obviously, huge deal. Promises made, promises kept, and all of that for sure. What's your sense of what this will do specifically? Look, you're from Goodland, Kansas, right? I mean, you're from the heartland. Back to state and local officials that know, I say officials, parents really, and communities that know best. So how do you see this kind of unfolding? What does it pragmatically look like, May?
Yeah, so I think you already saw the Department of Education cut itself in half as far as personnel. Department of Education is one of the newest and one of the smallest departments. So actually, this is not some behemoth. This is a pretty manageable task. I think the next thing you see is identifying the discrete tasks that Department of Education does that are helpful, that are useful, that maybe do have a federal role, identifying the best place to put those, and then taking all of the bureaucracy, things that are done that could be handed to the states or that are simply unnecessary, and then working with Doge, working with the Department of Education, working with others to just close those. So I was a school teacher before I went to law school, and the Department of Education does not add value. What adds value are good teachers and a good, strong relationship with parents. And the more that you can incentivize that at the local level, the more that you can empower states, empower communities, the better education is. And the more bureaucracy, the more layers of unnecessary things that you have to get done, the more money that goes not to the teachers, but to Washington, D.C., the worse our education system becomes. So this is a super powerful, extremely important first step, but there are a lot of steps to follow up.
And May, as we wrap up, here come the scare tactics by the Democrats and the liberals. Title I, they'd love to go after Title I, the economically disadvantaged students that rely on Title I programs. But Title I is congressionally authorized, so I'm just curious to get your take as to the safeguards put in place on that type of narrative that the liberal legacy media and others will concoct.
Well, let's just pretend that there's not congressional authorization. The
Right.
Department of Education has spent $3 trillion since its inception, and test scores have not improved. And so, and that affects poor kids, that affects disadvantaged kids the most, to be able to take money away from them, away from their communities, and not help them. That is terrible. So we can do better. And for the Democrats to say this is the best we can do, and we have to perpetuate this, is harmful for American families. But yes, if Congress has authorized it, then absolutely we're going to follow the law. And so what's happening here is not us trying to say Congress said to do something and we're going to do something different. We're going to work with Congress. We're going to work with parents. We're going to work with governors to actually improve the education system and not just shovel money into a federal bureaucracy.
May Mailman, thanks for being here from the White House. Appreciate you. Thank you.